A photograph can be more than just a picture frozen in time. Sometimes it holds secrets that reach across generations, whispers from the past that would not stay quiet. But what really caught the attention of everyone who saw this photograph was the gesture. The hand of the black girl carefully placed, making a sign that no one could understand. For more than 100 years, this image stayed in archives, studied by historians, checked by experts, and set aside as a simple curiosity, until one researcher refused to give up. If you are ready to uncover the surprising truth hidden in this photograph, subscribe and click the like button, because what you are about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about this image. If you're ready to uncover the surprising truth hidden in this photograph, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button, because what you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about this image. The photograph arrived at the Historical Preservation Society in Atlanta on a Tuesday morning in March, part of an estate sale from a building site in Charleston. Rebecca Torres, a preservation specialist with 15 years of experience cataloging Southern artifacts, barely looked at it at first. Another faded portrait, another piece of the past headed for the archives. But something made her stop. The image showed two young women, perhaps 16 years old, standing against a fancy backdrop typical of 1890s photography studios. Both wore high-necked gowns with leg-of-mutton sleeves. The fabric looked costly even through the sepia tones. Their hair was styled the same way, swept up in the Gibson girl fashion that was popular in the era. One girl was white with fair hair, the other black with dark eyes that seemed to look straight through the camera. What struck Rebecca wasn't just the unusual pairing, though that alone was surprising for 1895 Charleston, where racial separation was becoming more fixed into law. It was the way they stood, shoulders touching, heads tilted at the same angle, expressions almost the same. And then there was the hand gesture. The black girl's left hand rested against her chest, fingers positioned in a specific way that looked intentional. The thumb crossed over the palm, 3 fingers extended upward, pinky curled inward. It wasn't a casual pose, it looked like a signal, a message frozen in time. Rebecca photographed the portrait, uploaded it to the Society's database with a simple note. Unidentified subjects, Charleston, around 1895 unusual interracial portrait. Hand gesture of unknown meaning. She should have moved on to the next item in the collection. Instead, she found herself staring at those two faces, wondering what story they were trying to tell across more than 130 years. 3 days later, Rebecca could not stop thinking about the photograph. During her lunch break, she pulled up the digital file on her computer and began searching the Society's database for similar images from Charleston in the 1890s. What she found made her breath catch. There were 4 other photographs in the archives showing the same hand gesture, all taken in Charleston between 1892 and 1898, all showing different people: an elderly white woman, a middle-aged black man, 2 children of mixed apparent ancestry, and in every single image, someone was making that same deliberate sign. Thumb crossed over palm, 3 fingers up, pinky curled. Rebecca's hands trembled as she created a separate folder for the images. She zoomed in on each photograph, studying the gesture from every angle. It was too consistent to be chance, too intentional to be a random pose photographers used. This was purposeful communication, a message being kept across multiple photographs. But what made the original portrait even stranger was what she discovered in the bottom right corner. Using image enhancement software, she enlarged the photographer's stamp, barely visible in the original. J. Whitfield Studio, 42 Meeting Street, Charleston. Standard enough, but beneath it, almost invisible, was a handwritten note in faded ink. Family portrait, private commission. Family portrait. Rebecca stared at those 2 words. In 1895 Charleston, in the heart of the Jim Crow South, what family would pay for a formal portrait of a white girl and a black girl dressed the same and standing together with such clear affection? Adoption across racial lines was nearly impossible. Sisterhood across the color line was unthinkable. Yet, someone had paid money, a good amount of money, judging by the quality of the dresses and the professional setting, to document these 2 girls as family. Rebecca picked up her phone and called Dr. Marcus Hemley, a historian at Charleston University who specialized in post-Reconstruction South Carolina. If anyone could help her understand this impossibility, it would be him. "Marcus," she said when he answered, "I need you to look at something, and I need you to tell me if I'm seeing what I think I'm seeing." Dr. Hemley arrived at the Historical Preservation Society 2 days later, his curiosity clear in the way he immediately reached for the photograph. He studied it in silence for a full minute before speaking. "This shouldn't exist," he said quietly. "Not in 1895 Charleston, not anywhere in South Carolina." Rebecca nodded. "That's what I thought. But it does exist. And there are 4 more photographs with the same hand gesture. She showed him the other images. Marcus examined each one carefully, his expression growing more puzzled. Finally, he pulled out his phone and took pictures of all 5 photographs. This gesture, he said, pointing to the original portrait, it's not random. It's a family sign, probably used for identification or recognition. Wealthy families sometimes had private signals, especially families with secrets to protect. What kind of secrets? In 1895, the kind that could destroy reputations, cost inheritances, even get people killed. Marcus zoomed in on the 2 girls' faces. Look at their features carefully, Rebecca. Really look. She did, and slowly, impossibly, she began to see it. The shape of the eyes, the curve of the jaw, the identical way their lips curved slightly upward on the left side. These weren't just 2 girls posing together. These were 2 girls who shared blood. You're telling me they're related, Rebecca whispered. I'm telling you they might be sisters, Marcus corrected, which means we need to find out who they were, who their parents were, and how, in God's name, a family managed to keep 2 daughters of different races together. In 1895, Charleston, he pulled out a notebook and began making a list. We need birth records, property deeds, census data, church registries. We need to find the photographer's business records if they still exist. And we need to find out if anyone alive today might be descended from these girls. Rebecca felt the weight of the investigation settling over her. This wasn't just a curious historical note anymore. This was a family that had defied every law, every social norm, every expectation of their time. And they had left this photograph as proof. The Charleston County Records Office was a maze of documents, ledgers, and filing cabinets that smelled of old paper and preservative chemicals. Rebecca and Marcus spent 2 weeks carefully searching through birth records from 1879, 16 years before the photograph was taken. The search was complicated by the fact that many records from that era were incomplete or destroyed during the 1886 earthquake that devastated Charleston. But Marcus knew where to look. Private family registries kept by prominent families, church baptismal records, even tax documents that sometimes listed dependents. On their 9th day in the archives, Rebecca found something. A baptismal record from St. Philip's Episcopal Church, dated April 12, 1879, listed the baptism of Eleanor, daughter of Thomas. No last name recorded, which was unusual, but not unheard of. What caught Rebecca's attention was the note in the margin, written in different ink, clearly added later. Departed household, 1897. 2 hours later, Marcus found a matching record. A baptism at Morris Brown A.M. Church dated April 15, 1879, just 3 days after Eleanor's. Josephine, daughter of Alice, again, no surname. And again, a marginal note, departed household 1897. Same year, Rebecca said, excitement building. They both left or were sent away in 1897, 2 years after the photograph. Marcus was already pulling census records. The 1880 census showed hundreds of families in Charleston, but he focused on households with children born in early 1879. Most were regular family units, easily dismissed, but then he found an entry that made him stop. A household on Laguerre Street, one of Charleston's most prestigious addresses, listed its residents. Thomas, age 38, merchant. Alice, age 32, domestic. Eleanor, age 1. Josephine, age 1. The racial classifications were what made it extraordinary. Thomas was listed as white. Alice was listed as colored. Eleanor was listed as white. Josephine was listed as colored. This is it, Marcus breathed. This is the household. With the household identified, Rebecca and Marcus returned to the Historical Preservation Society to search for any personal documents that might have survived from that address. Most family papers were donated to archives when estates were settled or houses sold. If they were lucky, something might still exist. It took another week of searching, cross-referencing property records and estate inventories, but finally they found a collection of letters donated in 1952 by a woman named Catherine, who had purchased the Laguerre Street house after World War II. The letters had been discovered hidden inside a false bottom in a writing desk. There were 12 letters in total written between 1894 and 1897. Most were addressed "My dearest daughters," written in a firm masculine hand. They were signed simply, Father. Rebecca began reading aloud, her voice shaking slightly. "My dearest daughters, April 1895. Today you both turned 16, and I commissioned a portrait to mark this day. I know the world will not understand what we have built here, but I need you both to know that you are equally loved, equally cherished, equally my blood and my legacy. When you make our family sign in the photograph, you're telling the future that you belong to each other, no matter what anyone else says or believes." Marcus and Rebecca looked at each other. The hand gesture wasn't just a family sign. It was a deliberate message encoded in the photograph for future generations to understand. Another letter dated September 1895. The pressure from society grows daily. They cannot accept what we are. My business associates have made it clear that my relationships, both with Alice and with our daughters, are destroying my reputation. They threaten to ruin me, to take everything, but I will not send you away. I will not separate this family. The letters painted a picture of a man fighting desperately to hold his family together against impossible odds. Thomas had loved Alice, a freed woman working in his household, and they had built a life together despite the legal and social barriers. When Alice gave birth to Eleanor, lighter skinned, Thomas claimed her as his legitimate daughter. 3 days later, Alice gave birth to Josephine, darker skinned, and Thomas claimed her too, though the law would never recognize her the same way. For 16 years, he had raised them together as sisters, as equals, behind the protective walls of his house. The final letter, dated March 1897, was the hardest to read. My beloved daughters, I have failed you. The courts have ruled, and I have no choice. Eleanor, you will go north to live with my sister in Philadelphia. Josephine, you will stay here with Alice. They are forcing me to split you apart, to separate what should never be separated. But remember the sign. Remember that you are sisters always. Remember that blood is more than what the world says it is. The letters confirmed their relationship, but Rebecca and Marcus needed more proof, something that would connect the girls in the photograph clearly to Thomas and his household. They needed to find the photographer's original records. J. Whitfield's studio had operated on Meeting Street from 1888 to 1902, according to city business directories. The building itself had been demolished in the 1920s, but Marcus had a lead. Many professional photographers from that era donated their business records to the Charleston Museum before closing their studios. At the museum, a librarian directed them to a storage room filled with boxes of glass plate negatives, account ledgers, and appointment books from various Charleston photography studios. It took them 3 days to find the Whitfield collection. The ledger for 1895 was leather-bound and remarkably well preserved. Marcus flipped through the pages carefully, scanning the entries for April, the month mentioned in Thomas's letter, and there it was, April 9th, 1895. Private Commission, Family Portrait. Thomas Lagar Street. 2 subjects, daughters, full formal setting, paid in advance, $15. $15 was a large sum in 1895, more than a week's wages for most workers. Below the entry, in the same handwriting, was a note. Special instructions. Both girls to wear identical dresses, identical styling. Client requests family hand sign to be clearly visible. Negatives to be stored separately, not for public display. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. Thomas had known even then that this photograph might be the only lasting evidence of his daughter's sisterhood. He had paid extra, given specific instructions, ensured the gesture would be documented. But there was more. Clipped to the ledger page was a small envelope yellowed with age. Inside was a glass plate negative of the original portrait. Marcus held it up to the light and they could see the image in reverse. 2. Girls standing together, one making the family sign. On the edge of the negative, scratched into the emulsion in tiny letters, was a message the photographer had hidden. Sisters by blood. May truth endure. The photographer had known, and he had helped preserve the evidence. With the letters and the photographer's records, Rebecca and Marcus had established the basic facts. Thomas had fathered 2 daughters, Eleanor and Josephine, and raised them together until outside pressure forced him to separate them in 1897. But questions remained. What happened to the girls after they were separated? Did they ever see each other again? And most importantly, were there any living descendants who might carry the story forward? Marcus began searching genealogical databases, looking for traces of Eleanor and Josephine after 1897. It was difficult work. Women's records often disappeared when they married and changed their names, and records for black families were often incomplete. He found Eleanor first. She appeared in Philadelphia census records in 1900. Living with Thomas's sister, listed as a niece. She married in 1904, had 3 children, and died in 1957. Her descendants were relatively easy to trace through marriage records and obituaries. Josephine was harder to find. She disappeared from Charleston records after 1897. Marcus searched through AM church records, school registries, even employment records from local businesses. Nothing. Then, on a hunch, he searched in Philadelphia and he found her. Josephine appeared in Philadelphia city directories starting in 1905, working as a seamstress. She had left Charleston somehow and followed her sister north. Marcus's hands shook as he traced her life forward. Marriage in 1908, 4 children, death in 1963. But the truly surprising discovery came when he cross-referenced the addresses where both women lived. From 1905 until Eleanor's death in 1957, the 2 sisters lived within 3 blocks of each other in the same Philadelphia neighborhood. Their children grew up together, attended the same schools, played in the same streets. Census records showed visits between the households. City directories listed them with different surnames, but they had found each other again. Despite the law, despite society, despite everything that had tried to keep them apart, Eleanor and Josephine had rebuilt their sisterhood in Philadelphia. Rebecca stared at the documents Marcus had compiled. They never stopped being family. No, Marcus agreed. They just had to hide it better. Rebecca and Marcus now faced their biggest challenge, finding living descendants and proving scientifically that Eleanor and Josephine were biological sisters. Through genealogical research, Marcus identified 3 of Eleanor's great-grandchildren living in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. After weeks of careful outreach, explaining the research and showing them the photograph, 2 of them agreed to participate. David, a teacher in Pittsburgh, and Linda, a nurse in Philadelphia. Finding Josephine's descendants proved more complicated. Many had scattered across the country, and some were initially hesitant to participate in what seemed like an invasive investigation into their family history. But Marcus eventually connected with Josephine's great-grandson, Michael, who taught history at Howard University. When Michael saw the photograph of his great-grandmother standing beside a white girl in identical dresses, both making the same gesture, he wept. "She used to make that sign," he said quietly. "When I was little, my great-grandmother would tuck me in at night and make this sign over her heart. She said it meant, 'Family first, always.' I never knew where it came from. With the cooperation of the descendants, Rebecca arranged for DNA testing through a university genetics lab. The analysis would take weeks, but it would provide clear proof of the biological relationship between Eleanor and Josephine. While they waited, Marcus continued researching Thomas's background. He discovered that Thomas had been a moderately successful merchant, importing goods from the Caribbean. He had never legally married Alice. Interracial marriage was illegal in South Carolina, but property records showed he had deeded her a house in her own name, ensuring she would have security. After the forced separation of his daughters in 1897, Thomas's business declined rapidly. He died in 1902, and his obituary in the Charleston newspaper made no mention of any children. Officially, his line had ended, but the truth was far different. When the DNA results arrived, they confirmed what the letters and photographs had already suggested. David and Linda, Eleanor's descendants, shared genetic